So what will the Springboks do for their team selection for their semi-final against England, a team that changes their bench? They have such strength in depth. Well, they've gone exactly the same. An unchanged Springbok team. That's what I'm talking about in the video. You can have your comment on it down below. What do you make of this team? But also, how do you see the semi-final going? Make sure you like the video as well and subscribe to the channel. Let's get into it. So both this team news from South Africa and as well as the New Zealand team news yesterday is fascinating because it's unchanged. They have opted for continuity and cohesion over rest and rotation, which I think is really interesting, purely based upon the sort of games both of those teams played in the quarterfinals and the fact that it's a 6-day turnaround in that South Africa's victory over France and New Zealand's victory over Ireland were brilliant games, but mentally would have been a huge challenge and physically would have been a huge challenge as well, which is why, in all honesty, I probably expected to see both teams rotate a little bit more. Now, as I say, if you talk about continuity and you talk about cohesion, those are two really important and great things for the coaches to opt for. And it's a great reflection in a way of, firstly, the health of both of those squads and how they came through those various quarterfinals and the confidence they have in those players. Jacques Nienaber said in his press conference after the team selection was announced that if players don't train on Monday, then they aren't selected for the weekend. So obviously everyone after that game, I mean, they probably weren't exactly training, but recovery on Monday, everyone was fine on Monday and good to go again. So it is a positive, but as I say, for me, it's a little bit of a surprise just because I think as we've seen at this World Cup already, if we want to look at Ireland, the amount of minutes that their players had played coming into that quarter-final, it's really tough to ask these guys to go to the well again and again and again. So yeah, it makes sense in a lot of reasons. I'm a bit surprised not to see a bit more rotation, in particular for the Springboks because of the depth in that squad. As much as I understand the desire to go for an unchanged team and all the benefits that brings you. Two of those players that I think we often see, why aren't they involved, is Kane Moody and Andre Esterhuizen. I think both of them could have been, both of them are good enough to be, but ultimately they wanted to stick with what did the job already against the French. And I suppose you look at this game, and I'm kind of looking at it and thinking, South Africa are the favourites. We all know that. Heavy favourites, really, I would say. I think England will look to make life quite difficult for them. But even so, I think most likely the Springboks will get the victory. But what's the best approach for South Africa for this game? And I personally feel like it's to attack England early, and I actually think their team selection is also a bit of a reflection in this. They don't want to give England hope in this game, but in particular, I think when England have been stretched at this World Cup is when there's started to be holes there. Even look at the final pool game against Samoa, and it wasn't a great England performance, but even so, I felt it was when Samoa pushed the ball to the edge, that's where you can get rewards, I suppose, against this England team. If you keep it in the tighter channels, I think England do have a forward pack, particularly at an occasion like this, and it's going to be massive for England. You look at the players that played in the 2019 World Cup final, you feel how this team has been written off. I think England will get themselves to an emotional place that we haven't seen them in, certainly in this World Cup, and probably not for a few years potentially, in terms of the magnitude of this game. It is their opportunity to shut a lot of people up, myself included really, because I've written them off as well. So emotionally, I think England will get themselves to a place where physically they will look to go toe-to-toe with the Boks. Whether they can do it over the course of 80 minutes, I'm not so sure. But they'll certainly, I think, be able to put a pretty tough defence up early on, which is why I think if South Africa look to spread the ball wider, they might have more luck in their attack. Now, obviously, you have to earn the right to do that, and you can't necessarily just do it off every phase, just go touchline to touchline, because that's easy to defend as well. But I do think we've seen with this England team that you can put them under pressure by getting the ball into the wide channels and stretching their defence in that way. And I think this team is maybe a reflection of that, in that it's the same team that played against France. We saw how they were able to attack space in that quarter-final, particularly in that first half with the 3 tries that they scored. And then you have Faf de Klerk, Handre Pollard, Willie Le Roux coming off the bench, the experienced heads who can perhaps go to a more conservative game style. I think the Boks are probably hoping to have a pretty decent lead by halftime and then see out and kill off the rest of the game in the second half with those replacements. So it will be fascinating. It'll be interesting to see what England do as well. The reason I'm just doing this on the Springbok team is because the England team comes out in a couple of hours and I have to get to Heathrow to get my flight back to France. So I thought I probably wouldn't have time to do a full preview. So I'll do a video maybe tomorrow specifically on the England team news, but what about the Springbok team news, or lack of it, I suppose, the fact that they're unchanged? Drop a comment down below. I suppose also looking at the bench as well and mentioning Kane and Moody or Andre Esterhuizen, it's where do they fit in if you're going for a 5-3? You've got Faf coming off the bench, you've got Handre Pollard there as well, and then Willie Le Roux, I think, just gives you a few more options in terms of maybe how you move around that back line. Having said that, Kane and Moody can play 13 or can play wing, so it's horses for courses a little bit. And still no Lukhanyo Am. I think we're probably not going to see Lukhanyo Am, but at the same time, Rassie Erasmus and Jacques Nienaber love a curveball, so who knows, if they do get through this semi-final, maybe he'll come straight in and play in a World Cup final. You never know. The other thing is the beef between these two sides. It's been mentioned. I do love the build-up because it's a 2019 repeat. It's a 2007 World Cup final repeat, again in the Stade de France, which adds different layers to everything. I know Handre Pollard kind of spoke about if there's beef, there's beef, and Siya Kolisi has been asked about if there's a dislike between the two teams. Will that come into it at all, do you think? I think the players have their own motivation, in all honesty, as I've said already. I think for the South African players, as they often speak about it, is playing for South Africa, for the people, for the country, that sort of higher purpose that we've seen the Springboks talk about for a long time now. And from an England point of view, I think maybe it could come into the motivation a bit more for England, particularly those that lost in that 2019 final. I don't think it's going to be their main motivation. Their main motivation is to win the game, is to get themselves to a World Cup final, is to prove people wrong after all the criticism they've had, but maybe a bit more for England. I wouldn't blame them if that was the case, looking to right the wrongs of a World Cup final. Not that they deserve to win that game, but you can, as an athlete, they'll build it up in their mind, won't they? That, you know, you can create that sort of siege mentality and use different sorts of motivation. It goes back to the old Michael Jordan thing that we saw in The Last Dance of taking things personally to help it fuel your performance. Maybe England do that a bit more, I think less so for the Springboks. But I think it will be a really interesting game. I expect the Springboks to win. I think England could make life more difficult and more awkward than a lot of people are giving them credit for. But ultimately, I think Springboks are too good at this moment in time. Having said that, we have seen before, haven't we? Teams have not the toughest draw in a World Cup, only have to produce a couple of really top performances, whereas you look at the Boks now, they've played Ireland, played Scotland in that opening game, they've played France. It is very difficult to keep doing it against the top teams week after week. I think the Boks will be able to against England, but it's an interesting thought to consider. So as I say, let me know, what do you make of it? Are you happy with the team selection? And how do you see the game going? Would you have liked to see Rassie and Jacques rotate a little bit more? Or, as I think most Springbok fans do, you trust in those coaches and everything they've done since they've been in charge of this team? Make sure you like the video and make sure you're subscribed to the channel. I will do a reaction to the England team probably tomorrow now. And then, of course, we get into the first semi-final. I'll be at the Stade de France for Argentina against New Zealand. So another great weekend of rugby. Let's hope it lives up to the quarterfinals, although I think that's probably impossible, in all honesty, after those 4 games. But looking forward to it. Enjoy your weekend. I'll see you in the next one.